Okay, welcome to the Crow Show. Here's an interview I did on UFO Planet following the confirmation of UFOs in space from two states, Arizona and California. Anyhow, here it is. Cheers.
It's time for our feature interview. Today I'm joined by Crrow777 from San Diego, California, who along with Dark Skywatcher 74 had an amazing experience capturing footage of the same satellites and UFOs transitioning the moon from 500 miles apart here on the planet. Crow also captured new footage of a wave passing over the moon. So let's see what he has to say about it. Crrow777, welcome to the program again today. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's good to see you again.
Well, you've been doing some exciting things out there, and I really wanted to hook up with you and see what happened during the eclipse. I know you had some fascinating footage there of a couple of objects and a satellite. Can you tell us what you saw that night, what happened?
Well, I was actually communicating with Dark Skywatcher 74 before and during the eclipse.
Now down to the lower left lunar limb. Can you see it?
Yep, it just flew by, man. Just flew by, bro. There you go.
Where it's going to go off the lower limb now.
That's confirmation right there.
There it is, man. These are space objects.
So that object right there, guys, that we just saw, see, there's the second one he just called out. So these two objects that we just saw, the big one and the small one, these are definitely space-based objects.
The center of the lunar equator.
Yep, I got it.
As we began to film, we realized there was just an inordinate amount of objects coming through frame. And I got on the phone and I called him, and he had already caught just tons. I was just coming online at that point, and I think I had caught 15 in about half an hour.
15 UFOs transitioning the moon.
Well, actually, we'll say objects at this point. I've been doing this long enough to know that you really need to vet them. And I had a suspicion that many of them were satellites. When I got into Stellarium after the fact, there was just a steady stream of satellites going by the moon that night, which is unusual. But at one point during filming, I picked up two of the typical black objects, followed by a third. I immediately picked up the phone, got him on the line. He's in Arizona, roughly 500 miles away from me. And we confirmed objects going through camera on both ends simultaneous, which is historic because I don't think it's been done before. But as it turns out, the two black objects in frame are unidentifiable, so UFOs. But the one, which is really important, was identified as a satellite. I think it was, I think the name of it was Bright PL. I'm pulling that off the top of my head. But the cool thing about that is it shows the difference between satellites and the objects that I tend to post. And there is a big difference. Satellites go by very quickly, and they almost look like they have a speed blur, almost kind of a see-through look to them, where these black objects are something totally different. And to underscore that, when you see the ISS transit the moon and someone's lucky enough to get a shot because it's very quick, it looks like you expect it to look. And the satellite looked like I would expect the satellite to look, which brings us back to the other two objects, which are absolutely in space because they were confirmed simultaneous in two different states. So, I mean, there it is.
It's not too often you get that, where you get two people in two different states confirming the same thing from two different vantage points. So that's really historic, I believe, and that you were able to do that.
Well, it is, and there was another cool thing. There's footage up there, and I'm not sure what you'll run behind this thing, but you can actually see the lag time where I'm on the phone with Dark Skywatcher saying, you know, here comes something across the equator, and, you know, maybe a second and a half, 2 seconds, he's confirming it. So there's even a lag time there because we're 500 miles apart. So that was kind of cool, too. I'm sure if I was better at math, that would mean more to me.
Yeah. Well, do you think that this sighting, you know, during the eclipse had any specific meaning, or was it just the fact that you caught it during an eclipse?
This is what I can say that was unusual. There are many things unusual about the eclipse night. The first thing is that when I go to vet my objects in Stellarium, there's always a lot of satellites around, but this night there was just a steady stream right above the moon, and they were coming from all directions. And I have 139 clips that I filmed that night. I think there might be 5 to 10 that do not have an object transiting the moon in them. Now, to put that in perspective,
wow,
I think I could probably film 2 years and not get that many objects transiting the moon again. You know, on a typical night, we may see 2 birds. On a real busy night, we may see 5 birds. On the fortunate nights, we'll get an object that we can say is unusual in post. Excuse me. Now, very rarely, we'll pick up something that's probably a satellite. So to put that into perspective, when I first picked up the phone to call Dark Sky Watcher, I told him and I had just come online because there were clouds in the way. I told him I had 15 objects already filmed, and he told me he had picked up 15 in the last 30 minutes. So it was inordinate, the amount of man-made satellites and, however many of these turn out to be unknown objects. And at this point, I've ID'd, I think, 4 as unknowns.
Wow, that's incredible. A question that comes to my mind is a couple of weeks ago, I had a story on UFO Planet about 370,000 pieces of space junk. Is there any chance that any of this stuff that's being captured is possibly space junk?
Well, people bring that up because some of the black objects look like as they're traveling, they're spinning like this. And so that's always a question that gets asked. But the satellite footage is important for this reason. We can put an altitude on it, and you can see the size of it knowing that altitude. Now, I don't have that luxury with the unknowns, but my point would be, seemingly, if it was space junk, this would be some big, darn space junk.
Very large.
Yeah, much bigger than a satellite. And the other thing is, if there's that much space junk floating around up there that's that size, you would think that you would film it more frequently. And that's just a supposition on my part. But the big problem with unknown objects is always going to be, how far is it from the moon? How far is it from me? My guess is that these are large objects, much bigger than the satellites. So the question...
And most of the space junk up there, out of the 370,000 pieces of junk that they know that are up there, roughly 20,000 of them are large enough that they can be tracked with instrumentation from Earth. So it's really hard to say. I just wanted to throw that in there just to see what your thoughts were on that. Now, if we could move on to the next topic here, you've also had had another very exciting experience with a moon hologram. Can you tell me about that?
Well, this started back in 2012. I filmed a wave going across the moon, and that 2012 clip has become kind of the Rosetta Stone for the 5 that I've filmed to date. And I'll say right up front, of the 5 filmings, the second filming and the 4th filming are different. They don't feel 3D. They don't feel like they're wrapping around the moon, and I don't know what to think about that yet. But the other 3, they seem to be wrapping around the moon. And I know this is a bold assertion, but with the 2012 footage, I happen to pan the camera in a way that proves it's not camera malfunction, that we are looking at an event that is local and global to the moon. Now, fast forward to 2014, and I guess I should add, I filmed in September of 2012 when I caught this wave. We filmed all that time and caught nothing. 2014, I caught it again. We caught it a couple times before the eclipse. Then the night of the eclipse, I filmed it. The strange thing about it was the color of the moon. I was having real trouble with my eyes, and with a camera with a lens, I could pick up the red of the moon. But putting the camera onto the telescope, and that's not real high magnification. It's basically just using the telescope as a camera lens. So in essence, I'm collecting a lot more light. I could not pick up color, no matter what I did. I tried every setting. Now,
why do you suppose that is? What happened to the color?
You know, it's a strange thing. I asked for footage, and many people sent me footage, and a lot of it shows footage that's black and white through totality, and then after totality, all this red comes in. But that's not my problem. My problem is that my eyes can see color coming into totality. My camera with a lens can see color coming into totality. But once my camera with identical settings is put on my telescope, it's black and white, and that's a strange thing, and I don't know how to explain that yet. I'm still thinking about it, but when I couple it with filming the wave again, it makes you think. What are we looking at?
You think there's a possibility that there's a relationship then between the wave and the lack of color?
I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible. There is no logical explanation in my mind that when my eyes can see red, or maybe a rusty orange is a better description, when my camera can see that very same color, but my scope can't, the only difference is that I'm collecting more light and slightly more magnified. I'm not using an eyepiece. It's just simply the camera on the scope. I can't rationalize any scenario in my mind that why I shouldn't be able to see color at that point. And then when I do see a wave on top of that, I wonder. And people know my theories. They're probably a little more bold than the average theories that you cover here. So I kind of appreciate you covering it, coming at it with open enough mind, because I know what I'm saying is outlandish. I think that there's probably a hologram wave covering the moon at times. And if you question why would that be, I think there's only one answer, and that would be to cover your view of the moon, so that there are times when we don't see the surface of the moon.
What would be the purpose behind that? Do you think there's something going on up there that they don't want us to see then?
I think that would have to be the only logical deduction I can come up with. What they would be hiding, I don't know. And it sounds kind of crazy, because the next question is, who are they?
Yeah, that would be a good question.
I can't answer that either, but I can say this. The amount of energy it would take to put an energy wave over the whole globe of the moon would be staggering, in my estimation. And we are told that there is a lot of helium-3 on the moon, and helium-3, apparently, a cupful would power New York for a year or something like this. That's an exaggeration, but some small amount of helium-3 produces a large amount of energy. So it's all speculation at this point, but I can tell you that the 2012 filming of what I call the lunar hologram is bulletproof in the fact that it is a filmed event.
Okay, now I just want to touch on the technical aspects of that video, or your hologram videos or wave videos, for a moment. I just want to ask you, or have you tell us what you're shooting these with. They are digital cameras, correct? They are not film cameras as in videotape. No,
so I have footage up on my channel that shows my system. It's called Crrow Thanks Subscribers, but I'll explain to you exactly how I do it. I take a Canon T2i digital SLR that's 18 megapixels. I remove the lens, and I take what's called a T-adapter, and I just fasten it to the back of the scope. So in essence, my 8-inch telescope becomes the lens for the camera.
Okay.
Now, in some of the footage I've provided you, you will notice that each wave comes in at a different angle. I've measured the angle, and that angle is from my point of view. None of the waves are... Well, you know how a digital equipment fails. That's the first thing I would point out. When digital
equipment... Right, that's kind of what I'm getting at here.
Right. When it messes up, you get pixelation, you get straight digital-looking lines, and what you see in the footage is very organic waves, but no two of them are at the same angle. None of them are level to the camera sensor, and you've got to realize the scope is perfectly leveled every time that it's set up. It's got a little bubble, and I level it perfectly. Then the camera goes on, and I level that to the back of the scope. So none of the waves are level to the camera sensor. One goes up, the rest go down, and each one is at a different diagonal angle, which is measured in one of my videos.
Now, one of the reasons I kind of touched on that technology stuff is because, and you kind of went that way yourself, is back in the old days when we used to have video cameras that had actual tape in them, magnetic tape, if that tape got stretched or if it was off of its tracking, you would get kind of an effect similar to what you're seeing in the waves. But when you're using digital equipment, we know that the recording medium is perfect. It's all ones and zeros. So there's no stretching, there's no anti-tracking going on, things like that. And that eliminates those from the mix. And maybe makes it a little bit more understandable that this isn't an anomaly captured through your camera. So what do you really think's going on here? Do you think that there's things going on the moon then, Crow, that we're not privy to? And if that's happening, do you think that the Chinese are going to see it with their recent trip to the moon?
Well, for me to answer those truly how I feel,
you go ahead. You be totally honest. Don't worry about feeling like you're out in left field or anything.
I'll do it.
I just want to say this before you carry on, Crow. Keep in mind that people thought that Christopher Columbus was a wacko because he thought the world was round. Okay, carry on.
All right. Well, I can tell you this, and first I'll address the last thing you said before I tell you what I believe is going on the moon. The 2012 footage by Providence has a camera pan that proves that not only can it not be equipment, it proves it's a filmed event. And what happens in that footage is I pan down below the bottom of the moon, and the wave begin to come up. The camera pans above that, and then the wave catches up to the camera.
That wipes that right off the map, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's why I consider it the Rosetta Stone. My best guess, and this is way off right field, is that the moon doesn't belong to us. That the moon is probably occupied and probably has been for a long time. I base this on things that I've read that are very old, and I base this on other things that I've learned about footage from Apollo missions and even the Jade Rabbit. And I don't know if you and I have the same opinion about those missions, but I don't believe we're welcome at the moon. I don't believe we own it. And I think there's also problems with human beings taking their bodies through the Van Allen belt. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I think there's a lot of people that are right along there with you. And I believe personally that we went to the moon, but we stopped immediately. You know, just it came to a crashing halt, and they seem uninterested in it almost. And it makes you wonder why. It just, you know, to me it seems like if you want to send someone away to Mars, it's going to take a year to get there. You're going to put them into an environment they're unfamiliar with and expect them to survive. Wouldn't it make more sense to do a test run by sending them to the moon first, putting up a base there and seeing how we can survive before we, you know, learn to walk before you run?
Yeah, well, you know, there's some simple logic that you can apply here. So in the late 60s, we are told that we took a group of human beings and we sent them 250,000 miles away from planet Earth and put them on the moon. And then we stopped going. Now, this is akin to spending your complete life savings to build a Ferrari and then waking up one day and saying, you know what, we can't afford gas anymore, and just putting that Ferrari in the garage. But to top this off, we only go to low Earth orbit now. Most people don't realize that the space shuttle is, this is off the top of my head, so don't quote me, but it's like 200 miles above us.
That's what I'm familiar with, too. It's not that high up.
It's low Earth orbit. So now the problem that I have is really we went 250,000 miles in 1969, and now we're in the new millennium, and we can only go to low Earth orbit. And I have problems with that. I mean, really, you know, it's not like we had enough time to discover that much about the moon. Why would we walk away from it? And again, you make the valid point. That is the ultimate jumping point to go to Mars or somewhere else. Not
Makes
to mention,
sense to me.
telescopes. I mean, you wouldn't have all the atmospheric and light pollution and aberration that you have, just to use telescopes up there. So I just don't buy into it.
Well, a mountain climber doesn't start Let's try that again. A mountain climber does not start by climbing Mount Everest first. They always go for a mountain to prepare and learn and things like that. And it seems really odd to me that the NASA Space Agency is uninterested in the moon anymore and seems to only be interested in sending rovers. And quite frankly, there's not even a shuttle program anymore. So really the only ones who are in low Earth orbit are the Russians.
Right.
Well, and maybe the Chinese.
That brings up a whole other question. You spend the kind of money we told we were spending back in the 60s to create, the premier space agency of this planet. And now it's basically been dismantled down to Lord knows what. And to what end? And when you consider the amount of data, I mean, it's almost like there are people like me on YouTube providing more information these days than the so-called space agencies around the world. And it makes you wonder, what's that about? Is it because it's all militarized now and it's all national security, or whatever the reason would be?
Well, there's supposed to be a treaty that there will never be military in space, but we know that's already been broken because the Navy has their spacecraft up there, or the Marines, or whoever it is. One of the American agencies down there has their shuttle that's been orbiting the Earth for over a year. So what are they doing if it's not military? I'm sure they're not taking pictures for Grandma.
No, it seems like everything ends up getting militarized these days. But at the end of the day, you see the science that scientists NASA provide, and the Van Allen belt science is one big problem, because and you can read in multiple places what the Van Allen belt is and read 3 or 4 different descriptions of what it is. But at the time, we were told what the Van Allen belt was enough to stop any machine or human being from getting through it, and it was never really described how that was overcome. So,
especially in spacecraft that were supposedly about as thick as tinfoil.
That's right. And we know we've got satellites up there. As a matter of fact, we know we've got them up to at least 22,000 miles in geosynchronous orbit.
Right, that's where communication satellites sit, 22,300 miles out in the Clark Belt.
Right. We saw these the night of the eclipse. There was a whole steady stream of them coming by the moon, these geosynchronous satellites. But I don't know. Maybe we can get machines through the Van Allen belt, but I do not buy for a second that human beings go through the Van Allen belt.
Well, I would like to see them go back just to see. And we have to keep in mind that a lot of things that happened during the 60s were during the height of the Cold War, and there was a major competition going on between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time to see who could be the first at everything.
Right.
And who knows? Who knows what was propaganda and what was real? I like to think that we've been there, that mankind has been to the moon, but I'm always open for discussion of other thoughts and theories.
I always come back to, when I'm trying to gauge something for correctness, I always try to say, what if I was that guy? If I was in space, or if I was in the ISS, and I had a camera, I would, first of all, be taking pictures of the Earth from space. I would be taking pictures of the moon from space. Things going off to Mars would have an incredible view back of, the Earth and the moon together. And we just don't see these things. And I always wonder, those would be seemingly the most famous images that could ever be taken. And yet we don't see them. And when we do see images, they're not high resolution. A lot of the stuff we get is not as good as what I'm taking through my telescope. So I just have problems with what we're shown by the authorities.
And you're not alone. There's a lot of people who feel the same way. And my personal feeling is that if we were to spend as much money on space exploration as we do on military. I mean, my goodness, they spent $1.5 trillion chasing down a single terrorist hiding in a cave. Can imagine what that money could have done for space exploration. We'd be sitting on the moon and with front yards cutting the grass. Yeah. Instead, those that are in the powers prefer to shoot each other.
No,
and probably that has some sort of an effect on why ET isn't dropping in to visit us on every day and wanting to sit down to have a coffee. Maybe they're a little worried about the whack jobs that are running the place.
I think you make a good point. And, you know, people are asking if this is a hologram covering the moon, why are they covering it? I think you've hit the nail on the head. It seems like every year we see more military money spent. We see more just conflict everywhere. And so if there were advanced peoples trying to reach us, it seems logical to me that the moon would be a good place to, you know, stop and get ready. But it's unconscionable when we think about the money we spend on war at the expense of science, or even at the expense of people who need food, you know, if you really want to get down to it. But for my part, I'm not buying the space missions. I'm not buying them all the way back to the 60s. I just see too many problems with it. And my real problem is I'm a guy in my backyard with a medium-sized telescope. There is nothing I have seen that these observatories that watch 24/7 have not seen, and yet we don't get reports on it.
Don't hear a thing.
Don't hear a thing. So there it is.
Well, that's it. I appreciate you joining me today, Crow, and sharing some of your expertise. And I just want to mention in closing here that you have your website up and running now. And what is the address so the viewers can go check you out?
Yeah, it's actually getting a facelift right now. I had a basic site up, but you can find me at Crrow777UFO.com. So that's CRROWUFO.com.
Excellent. And we'll post that up on the screen so they can see it. Definitely check it out. You're an extremely popular ufologist on the internet, Crow, and rightfully so. Your work is spectacular, and I want to say thank you for joining me again today on the program.
Thanks for having me back, Darren.
Simply amazing. I have always enjoyed having Crrow777 as a guest on the program. Our ideas are not always the same, but the conversations I have with him are always enjoyable. Thanks so much, Crow, for participating.